You have to train yourself to embrace the suck and love it. And you have to be rigid in your outcome, but flexible in how you get there. Because the secret to success that I found is I change my approach until I get the result that I want.
Welcome to Your Intended Message, the perfect place for leaders and promising professionals who want to convey the intended message for greater success. Every week, we interview experts who address the challenges and best practices to deliver your message effectively. That might be one-to-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many. And perhaps the most important conversation, one-to-self. I'm your host, George Torok. My guest today is Brady Foulk. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Brady. 1, he is founder and head trainer at New Direction Dog Training. 2, with years of experience, he's honed his skills in canine behavior, obedience, emotional support, and service dog training. And 3, he helps individuals focus on what they can control rather than what they lack, and helps transform pet owners into effective leaders in their canine relationship. Brady Foulk, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so grateful to be here. And I want your audience to know if you have a dog, you're in the right place. We're going to talk about some dog training tips and tricks. I got lots to share. And yet, if you don't have a dog, I want you to know you're also in the right place. We're going to talk about effective, elegant leadership. We're going to talk about how it applies to your business and how it applies to your life. And I got lots of stories to share. So thank you all for giving me the next, 15, 20 minutes of your life.
And Brady, I'm sure that we've triggered some curiosity there. People saying, wait a minute, I thought this was supposed to be about communication skills. What are we talking about dog training? However, it turns out there's a lot of lessons in common between dog training, dog ownership, and leadership communication skills. And I can certainly testify to that. I remember when I was a new manager in an organization. My kids were younger, and at the same time, I also took my dog, a shepherd, for training, and I discovered that, hey, you know what? Some of these things I'm learning in dog training also apply to managing people on my team and raising my kids. And that didn't mean that I ran around giving everybody treats. No, but there were lessons. So Brady, let's start with some of the biggest lessons that you see that you've learned from dog training that you're actually calling dog or ownership leadership in terms of people leadership. What are some of the overlaps? Where do we see similarities?
Yeah, there's quite a few. It's a brilliant question because I got started in a lot of this because I'm a big Tony Robbins fan. And now I volunteer at his seminars and I've studied NLP, and he calls it the 7 steps to lasting change, but it also applies to dog training. And step 1 is to understand and appreciate their world. And you have to understand their body, their mind, and their spirit. And that's really the first step in everything that I do with the dog. I want to understand, what are they great at? And then what are they struggling with? And then what's the result? What are their goals? What are we looking to do? And once I understand that and I know what they love, I know what they're afraid of, I know what gets them super excited and what's kind of like meh. Once I understand that, then I can connect with them. I can connect with them and start building new patterns. And one thing that I like to talk about is one of the craziest dogs I trained, Fuchsia. Man, she came to me. She didn't really like food. She didn't really like toys. She was reactive towards people. She was reactive towards dogs. I remember her leash had it was her collar, and then it had chain on it, and then her regular leash. And I was like, why is this? And she's like, because she chews on her leash and then she runs away. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. That's good to know, right? I got to understand their world. So knowing this, we started working with her, and I don't use e-collars or prong collars or choke collars because I believe that being a leader means more than just getting results. And we took them, we went to their house, and the first thing I noticed when I came inside is there's a big mess. It was very tight space. It was kind of crammed together, and the one dog, Fuchsia, didn't really have any place to go. And then they had two cats, and the dog didn't really like the cats either. But I found out that's because they were kind of always bumping shoulders with each other. I don't know if you've been to Disneyland or amusement park when it's a little overly crowded and you're like, get away from me, you know? You feel like that, George?
Yes, you're right. There are times I don't like crowds at all, definitely. So I don't like it when, people are, I don't like being caught on a bus or a subway. Give me some room, please.
Most definitely. So that was like part of the dog training that they didn't understand is this is affecting the environment, is affecting what's happening into their inside world. And so it's paying attention to your environment and what you're creating as a company or for your own business or for your own life. And so the first thing I helped them do was to clean up and to create some space and to throw out some old things and add some new things, like a space for her dog to go and to like have alone time, because that's needed for everyone. I need my alone time too. I'm sure you do too, George. So
Yep, very much. Now that's interesting that you're right. People need alone time, and that's something we don't take into consideration often.
yeah. And then also being able to address when I feel anger or when I feel a certain emotion or frustrated, I'm going to go cool off and do something else. And that's a big one for myself too. I get frustrated at times. And so I need to go take a walk or do something. And for the dog can go lay down in your bed and chew on a bone, like you're okay over here. And so just giving them that permission and that safe place to go cool off, I feel like is very important. Number one. And then number two, we got to start looking at the associations that are being connected. And I use classical conditioning, which is Pavlovian conditioning, where you ring a bell, bring out the food. And after doing this about 15 to 20 times, you can condition the dog that when you ring the bell to start to drool, and then you bring out the food, right? So you're transferring this behavior of drooling when they see food to drooling when they hear the bell. And then operant conditioning, which is this idea that we all do things for two reasons, including dogs, including us. It's either to avoid pain or to get pleasure. Now, when I say that, there's elegant ways of inflicting pain. I believe in choices a lot. And one from my childhood is if my friends came over and they say, can Brady play? My mom would look at me and she goes, is your room clean? If my room is clean, I'm good. I can go play. If my room's not clean, she's like, how are you going to play if your room's not clean? So it's this grandma's rule that's happening all the time. And so that's operant conditioning. So I use these two principles. I want to create an association in your brain that this thing is valuable. And then I want to have you make the choice because you see the value in doing this thing.
Yeah, and I can see the concept of as simple as if your room's clean, you can go and play. And so now you are thinking, you're not thinking, oh, I don't want to clean my room. You're thinking, I want to go play.
Exactly. And it's this idea of doing the hard thing first. Most people, not most people, but sometimes even the easy route seems easier. And you're like, oh, okay. But most of the time it's too good to be true. The secret to success is repetition and consistency and routines and showing up day after day to practice these things. But anywho, so she likes to run away. So when they would open up their back door, there was a fenced backyard. The first thing she would do is she would bolt out the door and run away from us. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Well, how do you guys play with her? And we're like, oh, we just chase her around the yard. And I was like, interesting. That's fun to play sometimes, but if that's the only time you guys are doing this, you kind of teach your dog to run away from you. And if you're like at a park or anywhere else, it's very, very dangerous. So we got to change this, right? Now we have to associate great things to coming to us and not so great things by leaving us. And so what we do is very simply, when we open the door, she takes off to go running. We step outside, we call her, she doesn't come. So then we go back inside, we shut the door and we start having a party inside. And she goes, what's happening in here? And then she runs to the back door. When she comes to this back door, she joins the party and starts celebrating with us. And she's like, okay, these people are pretty cool. You can say cook and give them a treat too and reward them for partying with you. We shut the door, we open the door again. She takes off, but this time she takes off like halfway and she looks back at us and we start partying. And then she turns around and she comes back to us again. So now we're rewiring her brain and showing her that the party happens with us and we're not going to chase you anymore. So we're changing the association to what works for her and what doesn't work for her. So these two things of keeping the environment clean and being aware of the effect that it has, and then using elegantly pain and pleasure to show your dog what you want. And finally, another episode of classical conditioning, the dog hated the cat. So we set up a baby gate and we put the cat on one side, the dog on one side, and the dog didn't really like anything, but the one thing the dog did like was tuna. She would eat tuna. And so the cat would eat tuna too. So we started off just with like, each other's face, you guys get tuna. See each other's face, tuna. See each other's face, you get tuna. So now we're changing what it means to be in close proximity, because remember, they were rubbing past each other. But sometimes you're in a big group of friends and everyone's hugging each other and you're totally fine with it. You're like, I love this love, And so you can be okay with it. We just got to associate that emotion. So we got them to the point to where they were like licking the screen, just like licking tuna off both sides of the spoon together. They were like kissing each other. And then we would we would separate, and then we would do this. They did this for 3 weeks, a month consistency. They did it every day at 5:00. And by the end of the month, the cat and the dog, they love seeing each other. And they're like, can we play this game together? And then just giving them their own spots to cool down when there was frustration is very helpful. So that's my Fuchsia story. She was a great lesson for me. And it kind of shows how all of these things apply towards just general life. You got to do the hard things in life. You got to organize and stay control of your environment. And then you got to set up routines and habits and rituals.
And there's no question, life is full of hard things, of challenges that sometimes we're happy to face, but most of the time we kind of want to avoid those hard things, those painful moments. So, but we can only avoid it to some extent, because some of those hard moments we need to address in order to get to the success on the other side of that. And so now we need to change the way we look at the hard moment, the challenge. We need to see it as part of getting to that good feeling side.
Most definitely. I say embrace the suck. And you have to train yourself to embrace the suck and love it. And you have to be rigid in your outcome, but flexible in how you get there. Because the secret to success that I found is I change my approach until I get the result that I want. And I also understand that airplanes don't fly straight. Airplanes are constantly going back and forth, but they always end up at the airport where they're supposed to, because they redirect. They're always iterating. And as you get closer and closer, you hit your result. So very important stuff to kind of keep top of mind.
Now, Brady, you mentioned that you get to understand the dog, what they feel like, what their perspective is. And a dog can't just sit down and say, well, here's my problem, and da, da, da. It can't talk our language. So that means you need to pick up on those messages in a different way. And what do you do? How do you pick up on that?
Yeah, I take their temp. And their temp means tail, eyes and ears, mouth, and posture, TEMP. So by taking their temp, I pay attention. Are their eyes bright and open? Are their ears up? Is their tail wagging? What does it look like? And I think we all can remember leaders who intimidated us, or maybe leaders who bribed us, or leaders who inspired us. And the leaders who inspire us, it feels different. So I'm always inspiring the dog to want to work with me, and they understand that great things come through me. So as the temp stays high, then we're good to keep training. If the temp drops, that means something's happened. Like I've challenged them too much. This is too hard of a task for them to do, and they don't feel supported, or it's in an environment that's new and distracting. And sometimes I ask people if they've been to Disneyland, and sometimes people haven't. The first time you go to Disneyland, there's lots of noises and sounds and distractions, and losing a kid. I got lost in Disneyland. It's how I learned how not to get lost. I had to go up there and be like, Mr. and Mrs. Foulk, can you come get your kid? But it's very easy. But it's our job to show them.
And that's interesting, that the temp, and of them, I think the first one doesn't apply to people because we don't have tails anymore. But certainly when we're talking with people or talking to people or listening to people, we can certainly observe their body and what's it doing, because there's messages their body is saying, whether or not they're comfortable, not uncomfortable. That includes their eyes. Where are they looking? What do their eyes look like? Their mouth, is it a in a grimace? Is it a comfortable smile? Is it a fake smile? And certainly posture says a lot too about people. So there's a lot of overlap there. And we get too focused sometimes only on the words. And the words, and of course, the dog, has got ruff or bow wow. And yes, there's different tones. There's a friendly one and a threatening one. But other than that, you can't tell a lot from the words, but it's all about what comes through the body. And I'm curious, so you've helped the dogs change associations into more positive.
Mm.
Do the dogs pick up on your body language?
Most definitely. They pay attention to my body language as well as they're smelling things that are happening. There's this cool experiment that I read that they took a group and they had them watch a scary movie like The Shining. And then they had a group watch a fun movie like a Disney Princess Frozen movie, right? And they took sweat swabs from both of them. And then they had people bring in their dogs and they had an assistant sit across the room from them. And they put the sweat swab of the scary movie sweat in the center. And the dog walked over and smelled it and then ran away from the person, hid under the chair. Some dogs wouldn't go back into the room, right? So the dog is smelling that this person is terrified of something, like the chemicals that are being emitted. And I shouldn't be around this person because it's bad news. And then they took the frozen samples they put in the room. The dog smelled that. It went over to the assistant, started wagging its tail, greeting the person, very comfortable, very happy. And it goes to show that if we aren't in control of our bodies, of what's happening, of our focus and controlling what we can control versus what we can't control, then our dogs are going to pick up on that too. So my question is, how aware are you of what you're doing with your dog or your business or your life? How sensory acuity, how much do you have?
And you mentioned earlier about dealing with anger. Do dogs detect anger and do they react differently to that?
Every dog's a little bit different, right? So you got fight, flight, or freeze. So some dogs run away from scary things. Some dogs, like one time the fire alarm went off in my house. My dog got spooked and I jumped up on a chair to go grab it and he like nipped my butt. And I was like, ouch, man. But this is a sound that he'd never heard before. It was really scary. I jumped up and I was acting weird. But it's a sign to me. It's like, okay, we need to work on some loud noises that spook them because obviously this is scary. I didn't even have this thought before. So always be keeping track of these things. But some dogs bite, some dogs run away, some dogs just freeze. Like we have guinea pigs, they just freeze a lot of the time. But yeah, so it kind of depends.
And so I noticed, so the dog bit you.
Mm-hmm.
How did you react to the dog after that, when that happened? And how could you turn that into a learning experience and not I'll show you to bite me?
Yeah, that's a good point. I believe dogs, they respond in two ways, either a loving response or a cry for help. And he's saying, I'm really afraid right now. I went to this emotional place, and that's not who he is all the time, right? So I got to recognize that. So obviously it hurt. I rubbed my butt and I was like, ouch, man, that hurt. I stopped the beeping because it was obnoxious. And that was kind of the end of it, right? And it was just like a note that I have to go train that. There was no punishing him. There was nothing. It was just like, it just happened. It was just an accident.
And I can see how, so a dog clearly, when feeling threatened, it's probably natural for it to bite because that's how a dog protects itself. There are times when a person feels threatened and they might react. They're not necessarily going to bite. However, they might react with a punch or a fist, or they might simply yell or react in some negative way, fighting back. How can we deal with that when, let's just take somebody yelling back at us, screaming at us, well, an angry boss, for an example, or an angry customer. How can we deal with that in a way that's more positive?
Yeah, that's great. Now, I believe in a relationship, it's much more about the relation to the thing rather than the actual thing. So, whatever you guys are fighting about, it's not about the actual thing. Like, there's underlying things that's happening. And so, you got to understand and appreciate the person's world. You got to understand where they're coming from, why they're doing what they're doing. And that comes on both, it takes two people, right? So, they both have to be open and willing to communicate. Now, sometimes your boss isn't willing to communicate, and there's 8 ways you could deal with a problem for dog training. One, you could quit. You could get rid of the dog. You could get a divorce, right? Very, very easy. You could use positive punishment. You could throw a chair at them or something, right? You could hit the dog, hit your partner, right? Not very good habits. Negative reinforcement's interesting. This is like when you go to your grandma's house and you put your feet on the table and she just stares at you and gives you a mean look. And then as soon as you take your feet off the table, she smiles. And so you could use some negative reinforcement with your boss by just ignoring the bad behavior. And as soon as he gives you anything else that's positive, you're like, oh, okay. And you respond accordingly. But anything that triggers you, there's this idea that you have a stimulus and then a gap between a response. And that gap is what we're increasing in dogs. And it's also what we're increasing in ourselves. You have a stimulus, something that triggers you, and then you have a behavior. And we want to expand our options. Or you could have extinction, which just means you ignore it and hope that it goes away. Fingers crossed, which some people do for dog training too. They're like, I just hope they'll grow out of it. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So those are the 4 like not so good ways. The 4 good ways, one is to train an incompatible behavior. So what that means is you could set up an environment where you and your boss go out to lunch or something that's positive, and you train them that when we're having this conversation about this thing, right, it's all these positive things are happening. Like I'm making sure whatever you like in your world, we're doing that thing. So lots of good things are happening. And I also want to change how we have the conversation. So my hallucination is, my experience of you is this. It's not like you are this. It's like this pattern that I'm noticing is great in some ways. And then this is some of the challenges I have with it. And so when you communicate in different ways, it prevents you from telling a story and getting trapped into the story. And I see people tell stories all the time with their dogs and all sorts of things. But if you can just stay focused and be like, this is the pattern that like is challenging. I understand why you're doing it to protect yourself, like if you're closing off. But anywho, moving forward, you can shape an incompatible behavior. You can reward anything that's not the behavior. Very similar to negative reinforcement. You just don't give them a bad look. You're just, anytime they say something nice to you, you go, oh my gosh, thank you so much. Like, and then you share something, you have a conversation, but you stay positive about it. And then there's changing the motivation. This is very similar to the fuchsia story that I shared, that there's probably things in the environment that's happening. There's associations that have been formed. There's systems and routines that need to be set up in order to be changed. And this is kind of the whole ecology of a change. And if you can change the motivation behind it and create an environment that the dog likes to be in, if you can create a system that's clear so they know how to win the game. Most people get angry because they don't know how to win the game. Same with dogs, if it's not clear. So setting that up as well for them is very important. There's one more that I'm forgetting, but as I think of it, it may come back to me. But anywho, you got lots of options. I want you to know you always have had lots of options, and whichever one you pick to, commit to it.
And so let's address the issue of punishment.
Yeah.
When does punishment fit, and what are relevant punishments? Do we take a rolled up newspaper and hit the dog on the nose?
Yeah, I don't believe in physical punishments. I feel like we've evolved to a point to where we can communicate more effectively. It's like, it's not appropriate for me to hit you if I get mad at you. Like, I have to figure out how to communicate to you to work with you. And most of the time you probably don't feel heard. So punishment, how I look at it is, and also just to preface this, sometimes I felt like I had to walk on eggshells around my parents. And so like I was kind of like always like afraid of making a mistake. Sometimes I had to stand in the corner for an hour or two and just stare at the corner. I'd be on timeouts for very long periods of time. I was a rebel in some cases. If you told me don't hit the red button, I'm hitting the red button. I don't know if there's anyone else like that listening right now, but I'm with you. So I've learned that timeouts are effective in the short term. And so there does have to be consequences. Positive is not permissive. It's important to recognize that if there's a mistake, I'm not going to give you a reward after that. We're going to reset and we can try it again. And if you make another mistake, I'm going to ask myself, how am I responsible for this? How did I set up the game that you failed 2 times in a row right off the bat? So I'm challenging you too much. So that is key in it, is if there's something going wrong, like asking yourself, how am I responsible? And then, yeah, I use a lot of control of the environment too. So especially with puppies, there's gates and there's playpens and there's crate training going on, and I'm creating positive associations for all of these. So I'm making it really hard for you to make a mistake until I know you're at a place to be successful. And it's like that with employees too. Like you should be giving them challenges so that they can be successful, and building them up until a point where you can challenge them and give them something that they may fail at. And then you're testing them. Do you ask me for help, or do you just go off and go do it yourself? So everything is giving you information in life.
A relevant message. Make it hard for them to make a mistake in the first place. Mm-hmm. What can you do to adjust the environment and the communication?
Yeah, it's like putting bumpers up when you're bowling.
Brady, for people who would like to know more about dogs in particular, dog training, dog ownership, they can find more information and like-minded people at your online free community, which is at your website. And we have that description, that linked in the description below. Brady, as we prepare to wrap up, if you could sit down with a business leader, a leader who's called you in to help them manage and lead their team, and they understand dogs because they have a dog. Mm-hmm. And you could offer them 1, 2, or 3 lessons or analogies from dog training that they could use with their team. What might that be?
A few analogies is I would share the story about how my roommate had a different view of dog training than I did. And starting off, I told you my childhood, I felt like I was walking on eggshells. My parents used a lot of intimidation. When I got my dog, I bribed him a lot. But the challenge with bribing or bonuses is that you have to keep increasing them for people to be happy. So you want to really inspire people, especially like sometimes people want to go home early to see their kids. Sometimes people want the promotion. Sometimes people want more money. So you want to know what motivates these people. But anywho, my roommate did not believe some of these things. He just wanted to get a result. And so he went out to my dog who was on the back patio. And what I did is I pretended to leave because the neighbors told me that they heard some concerning noises coming from our apartment after I left, my dog yelping. So I pretended like I left, and I set up a camera and I watched him. And when my dog didn't do what he said, he kicked him and then he punched him. And then the dog listened. And it automatically, and then he just went inside. Once he got the result, he went inside and just kept doing the dishes. Oh man, I don't know if it lit a fire inside of me. I don't know if anyone else is just angry listening to this, but imagine me like watching this on camera. I grabbed him, I threw him to the ground. There was no gap in that response for me. There was just like, I saw that and I studied jujitsu and I've practiced these things. And so like, I really wanted to hurt this guy, and I got in a good position, and his girlfriend ran out and she's like, what are you doing? And I was like, do you know what this asshole's doing? And like, are you okay? Like, what's happening? And she's like, no, I love him. He blah, blah, blah. He's fine. All these things. Right. And I was like, I'm calling the police. So I called the police, and the police were like, well, we can't do anything really. And I was like, you should get a new roommate. And I was like, yeah, I think you're right. But I learned a very important lesson. You could get behavior by intimidating. You can get it by bribing, and you can get it by inspiring. But only one of those methods is going to build the connection with you and your dog or you and your employee that you're really craving. And that's what I found a lot of employers want, is that connection, that family, that community. And so we can all remember the leaders who intimidated us and bribed us, and we can think back like, I wouldn't go work for them again. I wouldn't go do that. And then the leaders or teachers who inspired us, we probably can still see their faces and hear their voices and remember how they made us feel. And so my message to people is, how do you want to be remembered? It's very important. And when you get furious, get curious. Ask yourself a question. How am I responsible for this? And what can I do to make this better? So it's a lot of ownership of the problem and inspiring people in the ways that they want to be inspired.
A lot of powerful and applicable lessons there. My guest today is Brady Foulk, reminding you that if you want to be successful, it's important in any type of leadership or communication. It's important to be consistent and establish routine.
If you like what you heard, tell your friends and post your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, because that helps more listeners find us. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.